Bună seara, doamnelor și domnilor, și bine ați venit! Sunt Ana Maria și alături de Jose Antonio, colegul meu, suntem absolut încântați să fim alături de dumneavoastră în această seară specială cu prima ediție a emisiunii Dincolo de Gânduri și Emoții, aici, în fiecare seară de luni, începând cu ora 20 la astv. Dragi telespectatori, vă mulțumim anticipat pentru atenția dumneavoastră, sperăm să ne fiți alături și să ne primiți în casele și inimile voastre pe parcursul acestei emisiuni și al celor ce vor urma. Ne propunem să vă aducem aproape cunoștințe utile despre cum să ne înțelegem mai bine, cum să ne gestionăm emoțiile și acțiunile și cum să navigăm prin viață cu mai multă claritate și autenticitate. Împreună putem construi o societate mai armonioasă și mai unită. Vă mulțumim! În această seară avem mare onoare să avem alături de noi un invitat cu totul special, creatorul unicii metodologii care a transformat înțelegerea comportamentului uman. Domnul John McWhirter, creatorul dezvoltării modelării comportamentale. Prin munca sa de pionerat, bazată de peste 30 de ani de cercetare riguroasă și aplicații practice inovatoare, John a sintetizat o înțelepciune vastă din diverse domenii, oferindu-ne o hartă complexă și nuanțată a comportamentului uman, a procesului de învățare și a dezvoltării personale. Pe John îl cunoaștem de mai bine de 15 ani. Și încă de la primul contact cu metodologia DBM și cu modul său unic de a preda, am fost absolut fascinată. În tot acest timp am continuat să ne formăm și să învățăm de la el. Îi suntem profund recunoscători pentru tot ce ne-a oferit: ghidare răbdătoare, tact, căldură și empatie. Este acel om extraordinar care, cu cât este mai cunoscător și mai pregătit, cu atât este mai umil. A creat această metodologie unică, cu aplicabilitate enormă în domenii diverse, precum educația, parentingul, afacerile și dezvoltarea personală. Efectele și impactul cunoașterii și aplicării DBM sunt semnificative în modul în care ne autogestionăm ca indivizi și în relațiile noastre cu ceilalți. Ceea ce m-a fascinat din primul moment a fost sentimentul de acceptare și de a fi văzută pentru cine sunt cu adevărat, nu pentru etichete sau acțiuni izolate. M-a impresionat unicitatea cu care eram tratată și curiozitatea reală de a înțelege preocupările mele profunde, în loc de a se oferi soluții superficiale, bazate pe informații limitate. Pentru prima dată m-am simțit văzută ca un om unic, fără judecată sau critică, liberă să explorez propriul meu mod de a face lucrurile, de a mă înțelege mai bine și de a îmbunătăți ceea ce e necesar. Și continui să o fac chiar și după 15 ani. John spune adesea: ceea ce nu percepi, nu poți schimba. Și așa este. O înțelegere superficială a sentimentelor sau acțiunilor ne împovărează. DBM ne învață să creăm un spațiu sigur pentru autoobservare, fără frică sau vină, pentru a înțelege și îmbunătăți comportamentele. Și un lucru esențial este că John a crezut în noi, ne-am simțit apreciați și valorizați. Aceasta este o bază fundamentală în orice relație, mai ales în educație. Nu există motivație mai mare decât sentimentul de a fi văzut și valorizat. Bine ai venit, John! Îți mulțumim că ești aici alături de noi. Și pentru început am vrea să ne spui puțin cum ai creat metodologia sau ce motivație sau ce goal ai vrut să acoperi cu crearea acestei metodologii.
Hello, John. Thank you very much to be here with us. Please, could you share with us how do you create this methodology? Why and what is the main purpose that you were trying to reach?
Okay, well, first of all, a little background. I began at university studying sciences and then moved to psychology. And in doing so, I did voluntary work with children and families and found that much of the psychology I was learning was not directly applicable. The theories were not very helpful for the problems, the challenges of the families that I worked with. So I began to do other more practical trainings outside university, things like Gestalt therapy, some hypnotherapy, various other things that were more useful for helping people. But even there were limitations. They tended to be coming from theories rather than trying to find out how each individual uniquely organized their reality, how they experience problems. And so over many years I began to study something called modeling, which is the idea of you could build an understanding of how someone was thinking and feeling without applying a theory. And that was the basis of it, and very much a developmental approach, starting with families and children, and from there developed into education and other applications, creativity, business. And the basic idea of the methodology is to understand how each individual organizes their sense of reality, how they develop through life, and going from a dependent child to an independent adult, basically. And a lot of the applications we center around parenting. The idea that the parents, mother, father, grandparents, other family members, people in the community, all contribute to the development of each child. And certainly early on in my career, going back 40 years, we developed taking interventions out of the office into the community, working with drug takers on the streets, families in the family home, working in their reality rather than bringing them always into an office to our reality, where things were very artificial. It was difficult to work on their real problems when it wasn't their real environment. And it's from there realizing that all professional interventions are really extensions of parenting, more expert intervention than parents have, developed the skills to do. Just as we see a doctor or a dentist, they've developed skills that we don't individually. And so therapists, counselors develop skills uniquely suited for interventions to help people develop. And the methodology, the modeling methodology of DBM aims to be holistic, covers all necessary interventions for helping people with develop. So there's the remedial side, working with problems. There's also the more developmental, positive side of education development. And the methodologies continued to develop over the last 40 years to be a complete field of study for anything to do with modeling, whether that's formal modeling that we get in sciences, but more it's focused on the natural modeling of each individual human being. And I could say more about the particular developments, but that's just an overview for the moment.
Thank you. And de când am cunoscut această metodologie, ceea ce ne-a captivat este conceptul de a înțelegerea calității de a fi unic, nu? De cum ne creăm propriul nostru model în baza experiențelor și cum creăm modelul din jurul nostru. Ai putea, te rog, să ne explici acest lucru pe înțelesul tuturor, cum ne poate ajuta această înțelegere să fim unici în felul nostru pe baza modeladului și pe baza modelului?
One of the main things that we have discovered with these methodologies about the importance of being unique. Each one has a model of the world and try to understand the things that they do. And can you explain how this can help us to communicate with one another better?
Well, because each person develops their own unique understanding of the world and also thinks in their own way, has their own emotional experiences. It's if you have a technique or a particular method, it might fit some people some of the time, but it'll never be a perfect fit for everyone. In fact, never probably a perfect fit for any individual. So if you can identify how people are constructing their sense of the world, how they are constructing their meaning, how they put together their values, their beliefs, their knowledge of the world, then you start from that to find out what's working, what's not working so well. Do they have self-doubt, criticisms that we can identify, and we can then work out how to help them develop. It's very much an educational approach. It's not seen as a traditional fixing. It's not the idea that people are broken. The idea is they work perfectly well, but they might work perfectly well, not in a good way. If someone has self-criticism, the criticism usually works very well and they feel bad. It's just not very useful. So if we can find out how are they doing that, listening to their language, paying attention to the non-verbals, the body behaviour, then we can model, build an understanding of how they're uniquely doing what they're doing. And then with the knowledge that we've developed in DBM, there's a whole range of processes, distinctions that we can help put together to find a way for them to develop more positively what they're doing. So every time that we work with someone, we never know exactly what we're going to do until we find out what they're doing first. So there's a lot of information gathering required, which is different if you start from a theory, you start with the knowledge of what you're going to do and what someone is doing. It's very much necessary to discover what each individual is doing. So the early parts of any intervention are finding out, first of all, what is the individual doing? And then there's a lot of creativity involved in trying to work out how could they do that better. And so there's a lot of learning, a lot of practice in learning the processes, learning, first of all, to identify and be able to describe what people are doing, and identify also what possibilities there are for doing it better, more effectively, more efficiently. So
Okay.
I could say a bit more about that or give some examples if that would be useful.
Another thing that was very shocking for us
Un alt lucru care ne-a șocat pe noi
was the possibility of adapting to each one through distinctions and through creating a model about everyone.
a fost posibilitatea să ne adaptăm distincțiilor și fiecare persoană cu modelul propriu.
So one of the things that we are involved has to do with group of people, more than one people. How do you think that this methodology is adapted to it too?
Well, there are processes that are more universal for all humans that we can identify, but we still don't know specifically how each individual is using them until we look and listen, ask questions, get examples of how they do things. So, for example, there's 3 levels of knowledge of the world. There's convictions that people have where they understand things without any evidence. There's beliefs where there's some evidence but still some doubt. And then there's knowledge where people have evidence. Now, all 3 are important to identify because often people confuse things. They confuse their convictions with knowledge and act as if it is the truth. Often, with grave consequences because they're not based in reality. And so there's various processes for investigating, questioning each of the types of knowledge to find out what it is. And then there's ways of updating that knowledge to make it more accurate. And that's part of the educational approach. It's to live more accurately in the world, understand the world more accurately. Certainly it's evident in world problems these days that a lot of problems come from poor understandings of the world and false knowledge of the world that people base their behaviour on. And it's challenging when you find that to then help people change it to be more accurate. And so that's one of the main areas that we work with is listening very much to the language used as a gateway into the thinking and understandings that people have.
Okay.
Vale. Nos gustaría también
¿En español?
ne-ar place la fel să avem să încercăm să apropiem cât mai aproape de o formă practică de a putea aplica distincțiile și, de exemplu, cum am putea să generăm o gândire mai inclusivă, mai respectuoasă, având în considerare diferite puncte de vedere, fără să ne simțim atacați și să putem să ascultăm un alt punct de vedere, fără să fie nicio problemă pentru noi.
We found sometimes that people are very extremist in the way of they are thinking about all the things. How do you think we can try to make the point of view closer and try to teach people to learn for the other instead of consider an enemy, because they are thinking in a different way.
Well, there's a number of possibilities that we've found useful. One of the main ways is exploring how the world is and trying on other ways of understanding. And certainly understand how other people might think differently. And understanding how the understanding of someone else is organized to be different, what it's based on, and what they then do with that understanding. And so there's a lot of, some of the older words of like empathy is involved directly in that, helping people understand other people better. And in that way is an indirect way of helping them come back to understanding themselves better and understanding their own thinking better. And so it's not to be criticizing people, saying that they're right or wrong. It's checking out, is the evidence there for what they're thinking? And how does the evidence work together to create an understanding? And sometimes it's about not changing totally the understanding, but modifying slightly, qualifying things a bit more, rather than having saying something is definitely the case. That might be the case, or maybe it's often the case, or it's understandable you think that that's the case. And let's explore, is it the case? Is it exactly like that, or is it slightly different? And so sometimes the changes are incremental, but once they're moving, it's easier to build in a small change. That's one of the people that's influenced my development a lot is Dr. Milton Erickson. He's a hypnotherapist and innovator of being client-centered. And he often emphasized that often people fail to get changes because they're trying to make too big a change too quickly. Sometimes it's more practical to have a small change and then build up from that, a bigger change.
Alt lucru foarte important, care de multe ori este...
Another thing very important.
Care pentru toți important este cum ajungem să decidem ceea ce decidem sau să gândim ceea ce gândim și câteodată acel impuls care îl avem de a face lucrurile, deși știm că trebuie să le facem de formă diferită. Cum ne putem educa să avem o gândire mai eficientă?
How do you think we can change the way we are thinking in order to get a better way of thinking?
Well, understanding more of the different components and process involved in our everyday thinking is a first step. And that's why in DBM we've developed hundreds of different distinctions so we can recognize what's actually happening. If you don't have a distinction for something, you can't notice it, and therefore you can't work with it. And therefore we have various distinctions for different kinds of thinking. And we're built on, and we've made use of formal models that have been developed as well. It's not all been created. I've not created everything. I've found the best of formal models that have been around and developed them further. So for example, for logical thinking, traditionally there's deduction and induction. There's a famous American philosopher, Charles Peirce, that identified a third kind, which was abduction. And abduction is different from deduction and induction. It is in fact probably the most important kind of thinking, because it's a creative thinking. Abduction is where we make guesses, we come up with new ideas. When we're creative and think something new, it's usually through abduction, not deduction or induction. It's a formal kind of modelling of distinction. And we've extended that further into a number of other thinking processes. So one of the benefits of modelling, identifying how things are being done, whether it's thinking or emotions, is that you also recognise things you don't recognise. Like, whoa, what's that? That's something new or something different. And that has led to many new developments. Many of the major developments in DBM has come by, first of all, modelling what we do know and understand, and then discovering something new that would never have been noticed had we not been modelling. Had we been imposing a theory or a method, we would just have seen our own theory and method. It's difficult to notice something new or different if it doesn't belong. Whereas with the modelling, we notice a lot of new things and many new thinking processes. And so recently I've just finished a training on the difference between concepts, ideas, and other kinds of thinking. Because normally people define concepts by referring to ideas, and ideas by referring to concepts and thinking, and not exactly how do we actually do them. And so we're able to identify the difference between conceptualizing and how we have ideas about the world, and how ideas are formed and strengthened and changed, and what makes an idea an idea. Now, a lot of these things are based on our senses, how we use our senses, how we see, hear, feel, taste and smell, to some degree as well, but not so much in thinking. And how we then build ideas from them. And ideas are fascinating things because they're not just a picture or a sound. It's a whole other structure that we've identified, how that works. And we identified it as a different kind of information. Normally we talk about analog and digital information. You know, the first computers were analog computers and then digital computers that we're all aware of. But the human mind works on a different kind of information. So for example, we get two-dimensional pictures through our eyes. Each eye has a two-dimensional picture at the back. But when we put them together in our mind, we get a three-dimensional experience. This third-dimensional experience is not what we see, but our mind creates that. And this, we call it a differential information. It's a different kind of information, which is why it's very common, but quite difficult to describe. Like an example that Gregory Bates, and one of our main influences as well, described a difference as something that is a fundamental experience of human sensory processing, but is not appreciated as much as it eventually will be. And the difference is something that we work on. So we notice the difference between an apple and an orange, for example, but the difference is not in the apple and orange, it's in our thinking, our experience of the apple and orange when we start to think about them. And so ideas are like a third dimension that we experience. They're built from our sensory experience, but they're an additional experience of them, which is why they're hard to describe until we begin to understand that they are a different kind of information. And so we can begin to work with ideas and how people organize ideas of the world, because from our ideas that we mainly organize what we do. The idea is meaning. Meaning is not something that you can see and feel and touch. It's a differential type of information. We experience our understanding, we experience meaning, but it's not physically in the world. Let's go right back to the philosopher Plato, thought ideas were in a different world because he couldn't find them in this world. In fact, ideas are in this world, they're just a different kind of experience, a different kind of information. And so this is, again, a major advantage in DBM, that we can distinguish these things. We can identify how ideas work, how concepts work, and how they're built and formed. Just as we identified how memory works as a behavior, it's something I identified right back about 40 years, and I worked with children in schools. Even though I was working for social services, many of the children were failing in school because they'd been out of school a lot, and we did school projects to help them reintegrate. But one of the projects I ended up doing was helping with memory, because children were not remembering things well. And we investigated how they remembered. And one of the things we discovered then, that unlike the dominant theories that I'd learned in university, that memory was a storage. And one of the benefits of modelling, again, is we can model formal models. And if we model the storage model of memory, it quickly breaks down. Because the idea of storage is that we have an experience that goes into memories, our mind, our memory, and stores there. Now, there's many problems with that. Now, simple things is often when we remember things, the memory is different from the original experience. And that's like you put a can of soup in your cupboard, you go to get it and it comes out a can of beans, it's changed. That shouldn't happen if it's pure storage. Another major problem with it is, in order to know that there's something stored, you have to remember you've stored it. There has to be some knowledge that something is stored in order to retrieve it. Now, that needs a memory of itself, which needs to be stored. And then another memory, you've got that memory stored. And very quickly, the whole process breaks down. It's impossible to have a storage and retrieval model that works without, at some point, being able to remember something without remembering it's stored there. And so that led to a really useful understanding that our remembering is a behavioral process. And therefore, we can help people improve their remembering by identifying how that behavior of remembering actually works. And that's been a big advantage. And again, often the mind itself, what we're remembering, is being able to repeat things. It's about repetition. And one of the things we found in exploring and developing people's remembering is one of the strange things is being able to remember, moving from working memory, as it's called in psychology, to short-term and then long-term memory, is about increasing the pauses between remembering, between redoing it. The longer you pause between visualizing something or repeating the experience you've had, the longer you can pause between doing it again. And so this has led to major developments in understanding how the different types of memory work together without storage. It's about being able to repeat an experience. And because we're repeating it, we can vary it and change it. That's why when we remember things, we often, if we're in a good mood, we remember it differently than if we're in a bad mood, because the doing of it is influenced by the mood we're in. If it was storage, it would be exactly the same every time. But of course, the previous problem, we don't know, we'd have to remember with something stored in order to retrieve it. And that's impossible. So there's been many developments that have actually come through modeling and remodeling formal models, not just the natural modeling that every human engages in. It's been a very productive process of going to a whole variety of psychological theories and ideas to do the same process. Check, how does this actually work in reality? How could it work? And in many ways, that has been problematic for a lot of the old traditional psychology, that Freud's idea of ids, egos, superegos, they don't exist. We can't go to the world and model them because they're made up. They're not real things in the world. Now, they can still be useful to have as a theory, but they're not very practical for practically helping people, because there's not something that they're doing that you can help them do differently. So there's been a number of other models that have been very useful, particularly practical models like the thinking models coming from Peirce and the work of Gregory Bateson, because they were describing how we actually think and or use our mind. Those have been much more practical for helping individuals with not just memory, but with imagination, creativity. And again, we've got lots of different models for creating things, different levels of creativity that we can engage in and help people to improve. So there's been a lot of benefits from modeling formal models of thinking to develop a more complete model of how we think and feel, and emotions as well. There have been a lot of developments in how we do emotions rather than have emotions. Because if some emotions are something you're doing, you can do them differently. And that's been, again, helped people to develop and improve the quality of their life incredibly. Ok.
Ok. Mulțumim foarte mult. Acum, în timp ce te ascultam, mi-am dat seama că, probabil...
While I was listening to you, I realized...
Am început așa cu lucruri despre modelage și despre metodologie, dar sunt multe lucruri care, sigur, publicul nostru poate nu înțeleg și, în primul rând, mi-am dat seama de ce sunt distincțiile, nu? Că pentru cei care ne ascultă, posibil că ceea ce vorbim noi de distincții nu le este prea familiar.
We started talking about models and distinctions, the main role that they have in the methodology. But maybe for some people it would be very difficult at the beginning to understand.
Exact. Și atunci dacă am putea să facem așa o mică descriere sau explicație ce sunt distincțiile mai exact când vorbim de distincții în meteorologie.
Explain a bit about the distinctions and how important they are in the way you work.
Well, it might be useful to start with one of the central models that we use in working with people, and that is called the self-management model. Now, the understanding there is that everyone goes from being a dependent baby to ideally a more independent adult, but there's various things that we need to develop and do that are done for us as a baby that gradually we take on and develop. Now, the doing things in the world we call performing. We have to perform, we have to dress ourselves, eat, walk. So we're always performing, doing things in the world. And to help our performing, we need to manage that performing, to know how best to do certain things. And so performing and then managing is managing about our performing. Whereas when we're performing, we're more attending to the world. And so there's a different reflection, a different content and thinking. So there's the world, performing, managing, and then we need to have reasons and purpose, values. Why are we managing it? What's important to us? So another level of thinking that we all engage in is self-directing, directing ourselves toward the things that are important. Our reasons and values give reasons and values for managing or performing in the world. And then another level of thinking we call self-supervising is we're always monitoring the well-being of ourselves in the world. And this is a central model that we use for planning interventions. Each of these levels of attending and managing ourselves can be improved. It might not be working well. And so on the positive side, we've got teaching, mentoring, and the negative side might say if there's problems, we've got, in tradition would be therapy or counselling. And these all fit together as a holistic model of intervention. We call the consultancy model, is identifying how are these levels of attending in the world, how are they developing? Now, in the early life, these are developed and influenced through parents. Parenting is how we develop to perform for ourselves instead of things done for us. But even when we're learning to do them, parents still do some things for us. We're learning to manage ourselves better as we grow up. Parents still do some managing for us, decision makings, because they've got a value and reason about how the world works for our well-being. Hopefully, ideally, that's what we learn from parents, and then later teachers and others in the world, that we gradually are able to direct ourselves and self-supervise our own well-being. Now, even then, it's impossible to be totally independent in the world. We're always depending on others for interventions. As I said earlier, doctors, dentists, others who have expertise that we don't have time to learn everything. We all specialize in some things. And the benefit of a complex society is that we have lots of people that specialize in things that we don't need to be doing for ourselves. They can do it a lot better. So in that way, we're always being parented by society. We're always relying on society in some ways to provide support, intervention, resources for people to make our clothes, provide food that we can go to the supermarket and buy. So there's always a dependency to some degree on others for our own well-being. The important thing is, can we manage ourselves well enough to make use of that and to deal with whatever challenges and difficulties arise? If we don't, if we're having difficulties, that's when we'll maybe seek some counselling, some support, some therapy. Or if we want to develop ourselves more, we might continue education, night classes, different hobbies, interests, to develop a quality of life. So this self-management model becomes a very central model for almost all that we do in DVM. And this has led to a lot of other distinctions, language distinctions as well. The performing is very much what we do. So there's a lot of what distinctions. The managing is how we're going to do that. So there's a lot of how, process distinctions come in at how do we manage ourselves, how best to do this. These values, reasons, the self-directing is very much about why. There's lots of why distinctions come in at that level. The self-supervising is more tenuous. We often get feelings of well-being or feelings of discomfort if we're aware that something's not quite right. And that's the word there we use in English, is that there's something not quite right, or that things are okay. So we led to a lot of language distinctions to help people notice what they're doing. And those what, how, why work within each of the levels as well. So if we get into more depth. So when we're performing something, although the main level distinction we use is, okay, what are we doing? We still use what, how, and why within that what. So whatever you're doing, there's how to manipulate it in the world. So if what you want to do is get petrol into your car, the performing of that, there's how to get the cap off, how to get the nozzle in. Why do you put the nozzle in first before squeezing the trigger so petrol doesn't go everywhere? There's a lot of learning within each of the levels of within the what, there's a what, how, why. That's what we call fractal modeling in DBM. Fractals are a central distinction we use a lot in DBM. You probably come across the fractal idea with a cauliflower, the whole cauliflower head. You take one floret off, it looks like a little cauliflower. There's very famous distinctions. There's very pretty patterns that Mandelbrot, the mathematician, developed. The Mandelbrot set was a mathematical creation of a very pretty fractal picture. So fractals are things that are self-similar at different levels of detail. And so the same thing when we're investigating individuals, we can keep a very simple investigation of how someone's thinking and feeling. But any time, any of the content, we can then investigate with increasing precision and detail as to how it's working and keep it all together. So we can go into very much detail, but then bring it back to a nice simple overview of how things are. And this is where the self-managing distinctions of how we perform in the world, manager performing, director performing, and supervise, check the well-being of ourselves in the world, is a very useful, central, quite a simple model that people can connect with their own experience very quickly. But then we can get into increasing depth about it once that's established. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Foarte util această explicație pentru toți cei care nu sunt obișnuiți cu asta. Și mă gândeam la fel, nu? Tu de fiecare dată spui ceea ce nu...
Every time you say...
Ceea ce nu percepem, nu putem schimba.
The things that we don't know, we can change.
Și asta de multe ori este relaționat și în comunicarea pe care o facem, importanța distincțiilor și a putea percepe mai mult în conversația cu ceilalți și mai ales în conversația cu copiii a nivel de educație.
So this could be very important too in order to communicate with other people. What distinction could be useful and when we are communicating with children. So,
și cât este de important specificitatea și unicitatea fiecăruia și o comunicare utilă în acest sens.
See how important is the uniqueness and the what do you say? A lot of uniqueness.
În ese
uniqueness of each one in this sense.
Oh, very much, and especially thinking developmentally when children are how they are now, but they're going to be different, next year and the year after as they continue developing. But then how to help build them appropriately for their age, working with how they are now at the same time, building up their development for the future. That's very important. And it's knowing the different idea, thinking the different stages of development. It's still is useful to use different stages as well as ages to help notice that there's a difference now compared with a year ago, 2 years ago, and in a year's time they'll be different. And working in education, educationally, it's working not just to achieve things now, but also to build up the building blocks for the future learnings. And that's something that psychologist Vygotsky was a big influence in DBM as well, a Russian psychologist. This idea of concept development, again, influenced how we form concepts. And the abilities of children at different ages, while they're performing, again, something, they're also developing, creating experiences for their future learning. And so I was always thinking developmentally is a different way of thinking than just thinking of the pure performance now. So what can we do while they're learning something to be setting up some building blocks for the next learning beyond this, what they're going to be doing next. And one of the things for the thinking and building the concepts that we found is really important is a richness of experience. And that's very important for young people to have a richness of experience, different cultures, different ideas, different foods, different musical instruments, different sounds. The richer the child's experience, the richer, the more they've got available to think and feel with. The richer their model the world, the greater quality of life they can experience. So impoverished experience is a limitation in development of children into, quality adult life. And this is where poverty, financial poverty, is challenging, but it's also limiting. But it's also limiting in terms of the experiences children can acquire. And this is one of the things that's not, in working with people, it's not all about working with their minds. It's appreciating the realities of the external world that they're living in. If someone is living in an impoverished, physically impoverished environment, their experience is impoverished. They have less to work with to build deep depth connections to the world in a rich and positive way. And so poverty is a major challenge, poverty of experience. And it's really important that young people have a richness of experience to build a rich quality of life from.
Cred că ceea ce ar ajuta foarte mult ar fi acea comunicare mult mai specifică.
With very helpful, specific way of communication.
Conectând cu valorile și ceea ce e important pentru ei, pentru că cred că
connecting with values and what is important for them.
Nu este că e greu să comunici cu ei, ci că nu se face o comunicare poate mult mai apropiată la ceea ce au nevoie.
Sometimes it's difficult to make a communication close to them.
Well, the most important thing is understanding what the child is thinking and appreciating it. We don't have to use any of if they've got certain street talk or, certain words, we don't have to copy all the words. That can sound a bit silly, an adult speaking in a, slang language. The important thing is being able to talk to their meaning, talk to their understanding, and that they know that they're being understood and that they are being appreciated and cared for, not talked down to, but not dismissed. Equally, not being patronized and, pretending that, you're hip or, you're a gang member or whatever, if it's working with children in that situation. The important thing is to be available and listen and appreciate and talk clearly back to show that you understand what they're saying, even though they use different words and different tones of voice or whatever. That you don't have to copy the language. The important thing is the caring and understanding and appreciating.
Și asta face, nu? Pentru că de obicei învățarea este relaționată la motivație, nu? Cu cât se simt mai apreciați și înțelegi, cu atât și învățarea este mai productivă.
When they feel that they are really, really valuable for the parents. Maybe it's a good way to connect with them and make the learning process better.
Very important that the parents also feel cared for and looked after and supported. But yeah, children do need the security and the understanding. They don't need a pal. They've got pals, friends. They need a parent. Then that's what the parent should be. The parent can be friendly, but they're still the parent. They should be ideally, the parenting is said ideally to help a dependent baby become an independent adult. And that's a direction. It's a goal that's never achieved perfectly. No one's ever a perfectly independent adult, but it's a direction to go in, to be as independent as possible. And in doing that, though, there's important aspects of the quality of life in families experience, to feel cared for, looked after, and because that'll be the skills that they'll need from their parents, for their children, to have role models and experiences, a richness and a variety of experience, and to appreciate that everyone is different. You don't need to copy a parent. You don't need to be the same as. Equally, you don't need to be the opposite of. Some children try to be the opposite of their parents, to, be in a little revolt. That still is limited. It's not a richness. There's not choice, that they have ability to be themselves and to grow and develop as themselves. And that's important. And it doesn't need much contact. It needs quality of contact more than quantity. And just the caring, knowing that they're cared for and looked after, is central to quality experience for a child, whatever age.
Mulțumim, John. Așa, spre sfârșit, cum am putea spune, în ce am putea spune că se diferențiază metodologia de BM de restul, de ceea ce există, ce se oferă?
Big difference between this methodology and other ones?
Well, the biggest difference is being world-centered and client-centered. It's starting with how the world is and building an understanding of it, rather than starting from a theory or presupposing how the world is and imposing that onto the world. And one of the other key things that's crucial in building an accurate model is testing it. One of the things that's required as a modeler is to be totally honest. If the world behaves differently than you think it does, the world is the world. You're wrong, not the world. And so being totally honest about how the world actually is, even if it's not how you'd like it to be, is really central in modeling accurately. Whereas in the past, when I used to use, as most people do traditionally, theories and impose the theories, it's like just reorganizing the world to fit into the theory. You get reinforces the theory, it just fits in. But all the things that don't fit the theory are ignored or not attended to. So you can always fit things into a theory, but that's not really how the world is accurately. So when you use what you understand from a theory, it doesn't have the same precise description of the world that's necessary for a precise changing of the world, whether it's a developmental change or remedial change. Being one of the great benefits is a quality of life benefit, is to understand and connect the world more. One of the things I've appreciated myself through the developing of DBM is with the more distinctions I've developed, there's more of the world available for me to notice, to appreciate and enjoy. So apart from the professional benefits of being able to help people more, the educational benefits of being able to teach people more accurately, is a personal benefit. It's helped in all aspects of my life. I'm a very dedicated gardener. I've been growing things organically for 45 years or more. And the processes there are about the soil is enriching the soil, to improve the soil. And it's the same aspect of enriching the lives of people. It's not about using chemicals, imposing artificial supplements onto the soil to get bigger vegetables. It's about a quality environment where things are more harmonious and grow well and develop well. And a similar aspect in the methodology, it's to build an independence, a harmonious mind that can manage itself more effectively in the world, and to appreciate more of the world by having more distinctions, to connect more intimately and in more detail with the world. Now that means being more aware of some negative things as well, but it's balanced by being aware of the great misery and horror and terrible things going on in the world. It's not to ignore them, it's to acknowledge that and hopefully do whatever little we can to change that. At the same time, to be more aware of the beauty, that most people are nice to each other, are loving and caring to each other. The murderous mayhem is the minority, but sadly still far too many. There's far, far too many horrible things going on in the world. But the benefit personally to me has been a great increase in the quality of life. I just experience life in a richer, more deeply way and staying connected with it. So each second, each minute is more life to experience and enjoy. Mainly, that's one of the benefits, I think, more than any other one for me.
Mulțumim foarte mult, John. Ne-ar face plăcere să mai putem continua. Dar am ajuns la sfârșitul acestei emisiuni.
We reached the end of the mission.
Îți mulțumim foarte mult că ai fost alături de noi. Îți mulțumim pentru generozitatea ta de fiecare dată când împărtășești cunoștințele tale și nu sunt puține despre metodologie și în general.
Thank you very much for all the explication and the knowledge that you have shared with us. Thank you very much.
Mulțumim
Thank you for the invitation. It's challenging because I know over 1,000 different models and distinctions. It's a huge field in developing every day. It's a pleasure to share a little bit with you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Mulțumim foarte mult, mulțumim și telespectatorilor pentru răbdarea lor și pentru că ne ascultați. Sper să ne ascultați și în alte emisiunile care vor urma. Mulțumim echipei care face posibil în spatele camerelor această emisiune și vă dorim o săptămână plină de înțelegere și armonie. Vă mulțumim!